Right, I'm going to show you guys how to read a birth chart. A birth chart can actually be visualized a number of different ways. There are a bunch of different styles out there, but every birth chart tells the same information. Just depending on the style of chart you're using, it's going to look slightly different. So for today, we're actually going to be looking at what the South Indian birth chart looks like. And the South Indian birth chart is going to come really handy for what we're going to be checking today, which is, are you going to be a wealthy person? The first thing that we need to do to confirm if you or someone you know is going to be a wealthy person is we need to pull up their birth chart, and then we actually need to read the birth chart. What I recommend is to go to this website, vaultsoftheheavens.com. This website is my go-to website for when I need a free chart calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to go over here to this link for the chart creator. Go ahead and click on that. For the purposes of this video, we're going to use some example charts. So I'm going to use Oprah's chart to get us started, and then I'll show you Drake's chart and a couple more. Let's start off with Oprah's chart. I have all her information inputted over here. The reason I'm showing you this screen is because I want to bring your attention to this section which says chart style. So for chart style, there are two selections, North Indian and South Indian. For today, for the purposes of this video, go ahead and select South Indian. All right, I got Oprah's chart over here. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what the heck am I looking at? That's okay. Do not worry. I'm going to walk you through this really, really simple to actually understand how to read one of these charts. It looks a little intimidating, but it's not that bad. Okay, so the place you need to start when you're reading a birth chart is you need to find the first house. The first house is always depicted in the South Indian system with a diagonal line. So down here you can see there's a diagonal line. Okay, so this becomes the first house. So to read a birth chart, just like I have it over here, you got to find this line. This line is the ascendant or the first house. So wherever that's placed, that becomes your first house. And from the first house, you read in a clockwise fashion. So you go in a clockwise motion, and that's how you read a birth chart. So wherever this diagonal line is, that is the first house. So let's go over to Oprah's chart. All right, Oprah's chart. We see that diagonal line is down here. That is in the sign of Sagittarius. So Sagittarius becomes the first house. Sagittarius is the ascendant. The ascendant and the first house are the same thing. If you're still not sure, let's look at another example. So this is going to be Drake's chart. All right, so in Drake's chart, we see that that diagonal line is over here in the sign of Leo. So let's go back over here. So again, you read this chart in a clockwise, you're going to clockwise motion. So we see that diagonal line, it's in the sign of Leo. Leo becomes the first house. All right, so now that you have an idea how to read a birth chart, I think you would agree it's not that difficult. Basically, you find that first house and you just count clockwise. There's only 12 houses, so not that difficult to actually begin reading one of these charts. But that's not why you're here. You're here to figure out if you are going to be a wealthy person or if somebody you know is going to be a wealthy person. So the way to check that, there are actually a couple ways, but I'm going to show you the first technique. This is actually the easiest technique. This is the easiest way to check if you are going to be what we call a Sri Mantaha. A Sri Mantaha basically is a person who is wealthier than the average person in their country or culture. And an important thing to know about Sri Mantaha is you can actually be a Sri Mantaha multiple times. When we go through Oprah's chart, I'm going to show you. She actually is a Sri Mantaha 3 times. Which makes sense. She's super, super wealthy, so I'm not surprised to see that. But let's get back to the task at hand and determine, how do you confirm if you're Sri Mantaha? How do you confirm if you're going to be wealthier than the average person? Okay, so again, this is the simplest method. The other techniques I'm going to show you, they're going to get a little more complex. I think you'll still be able to follow along, but this will be the starting point. This is the easiest thing. So all you need to do to confirm if you are a Sri Mantaha is, once you have your chart open, you go over here to this table. So this table, what you're going to look for is you're going to look for the AK. So it's going to be the first column. This is the AK. AK is the Atmakarka. You don't need to worry about what this stands for, what it means. All you need to know is what planet is your AK. So in Oprah's case, her AK is Mars. Okay, easy enough. Now what you need to do is we're actually going to scroll down and we're going to go to something called the D9 chart. So this chart right here, this is the main birth chart, but there are actually some additional charts that we can look at that actually are calculated based on this main birth chart. So if I scroll down and I go to the second row and I go to the second column, I'm going to see this square here and it has a big number 9 in the middle. That's what we're looking for. That's the D9 chart. All right, so in the D9 chart, what we need to do is we need to find the AK. So the AK, once again, in Oprah's chart is Mars. So go down to the D9 chart. Okay, her AK is Mars. Where is Mars? Mars is over here. All right. Now, what you need to do is you want to confirm if whatever planet is your AK, you want to confirm if that is sitting with either Jupiter, Venus, or the moon. Okay? So your AK, if it's sitting with Jupiter, Venus, or the moon, you are a Sri Mantaha. And in Oprah's chart, we can see that her AK, Mars, is sitting with Jupiter. Okay, so that actually meets our requirement. I'll show this to you in a little bit of a bigger format. So AK is Mars for her, for Oprah, and her AK is sitting with Jupiter. So this fulfills our requirement. Oprah is a Sri Mantaha based on her AK. Okay, let's check another person's chart. Let's check Drake's chart. So in Drake's chart, we go over to this table. We see, okay, AK. His AK is ME. ME stands for Mercury. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go down to this D9 chart right here. And I got to find Mercury. Okay, looks like Mercury's right here. Mercury is actually sitting all alone. Mercury is by itself. So this means that Drake is not a Sri Mantaha because the planet Jupiter is not here, the planet Venus is not here, the moon is not here. Okay, so if I show this to you guys in a little bit of a bigger format, we'll see the same thing. So in Drake's D9 chart, Mercury is his AK, his Atmakarka, but it's sitting all alone. So Drake does not fulfill this requirement. He is not a Sri Mantaha. But there are actually a couple other ways that we can confirm. This was the easiest technique. I actually wanted to mention an additional point. So I had explained that if your AK is sitting with Jupiter or Venus or the moon, that would make you a Sri Mantha. But there's actually two additional things that we need to consider. What happens if your AK up here is actually one of those planets? What if it is the moon, or what if it's Venus, or what if it's Jupiter? Does that automatically make you a Sri Mantaha? Unfortunately, it does not. So what you would need to look at is you would want to see that planet sitting with another Sri Mantaha planet. So for example, let's just look at this D9 chart. All right, so just for this example, let's say that Drake's AK was Jupiter. It's not, it's Mercury, but let's just say it was Jupiter. All right, so his AK is Jupiter. If Jupiter was also sitting with Venus or it was sitting with the moon, that would make Drake a Sri Mantaha based on this technique. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now, there's also one other thing to consider. All right, so I mentioned that if your AK is sitting with the moon or Venus or Jupiter, you become a Sri Mantaha. That is true. But there's another way that you can become a Sri Mantaha based on your AK. And what you have to see is if your AK is sitting with an exalted planet. So an exalted planet just means a planet that's doing really good in your chart. And I want to show you guys what the exalted planets are. So these are all the exalted planets. Now I'm going to show you guys the second technique to check if you are a Sri Mantaha. So in the first technique, we looked at the AK and we checked the D9 chart. So for this second technique, we're actually going to be using this main birth chart. And what we're going to be looking for is something called the Pada. Now, you don't need to worry about what the Pada is. You simply need to be able to find it in your chart. So to find the Pada, you need to confirm what planet is the ruler of your first house. So we're going to use Oprah's chart as an example. So Oprah's first house is in the sign of Sagittarius. So we need to confirm what planet is the ruler of Sagittarius. So the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter. All right. So we need to find Jupiter in Oprah's chart. Jupiter is actually over here. I'm going to show you guys how to actually calculate the Pada now that you know where the ruler of the first house is. Now that we've found Jupiter, we're going to use that to help us figure out where the Pada is. Jupiter is in the 7th house in her chart. So counting from the ascendant or the first house, Jupiter is over here. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 houses away. When the ruler of the first house or the ascendant is either in the first house, meaning if Jupiter was sitting in this house itself, or if Jupiter is 7 houses away, like it is in Oprah's chart, that means that the Pada actually goes to the 10th house. So if we count from the first house, we see that Jupiter is 7 houses away, and that means that the Pada is 10 houses away. All right. So now that we know that the Pada is 10 houses away, we want to confirm if either Jupiter, Venus, or the moon are sitting here in this 10th house. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Her 10th house is actually empty. Okay. So that means that she is not a Sri Mantaha. Another thing that we can check is if an exalted planet is sitting in the same house as the Pada. Now, in Oprah's chart, her 10th house is empty, meaning her Pada is not sitting with any planets. But if it were sitting with an exalted planet, that could also make her Sri Mantha. So what are the exalted planets? Well, the planets become exalted in specific signs. So you can use this chart right here to help you determine if you have any exalted planets in your chart. Now, in Oprah's case, there are no planets in her 10th house. So unfortunately, her Pada is all alone and she is not a Sri Mantaha based on this technique. Okay, let's check another chart. Let's check Drake's chart. So we're going to do the same thing in Drake's chart. We're going to find the first house or the ascendant. So the first house is right here in Leo. That's why we see this diagonal line. So now we need to determine what planet is the ruler of Leo. The ruler of Leo is actually the sun. So we need to find the sun in Drake's chart. So if we go back to Drake's chart, we're going to see that the sun is over here. All right. So the sun is 1, 2, 3, 4 houses away from the first house or from the ascendant in Drake's chart. This is his first house. The ruler of Leo is the sun. It's sitting here in the 4th house. Okay, if we look over here, when the ruler is either in the 4th or the 10th, then the pada goes to the 4th house. So because the ruler of Leo is in the 4th house, that means that the pada goes to the 4th house. Now, what we want to see is if there are any planets sitting with the sun. And specifically, we want to see if either Jupiter, Venus, or the moon is sitting with the sun, or an exalted planet. Okay, let's go back to his chart. And if we go down here, we see that sitting with his pada, because his pada is in this 4th house, we see that Venus is there. So Venus actually is one of the Sri Mantaha planets. So Venus makes him a Sri Mantaha. And we'll just also confirm if there are any exalted planets sitting in his chart. Okay, so these are the exalted planets. So let's see, we got Mercury. What sign is Mercury in? Mercury's in Scorpio. No, we would need Mercury in Virgo to be exalted. So no. Venus. Well, Venus already meets our requirement. The pada, when it's with Venus, the person becomes a Sri Mantaha. But if Venus was in the sign of Pisces, which it's not, it's in the sign of Scorpio, but if it was in the sign of Pisces, that would make him a Sri Mantaha again. So he would get Sri Mantaha twice, one from his pada being with Venus, and one from his pada being with an exalted planet, which would have been an exalted Venus. Drake is not a Sri Mantaha based on that technique. So we have looked at 2 different techniques to confirm if you or someone you know is going to be a Sri Mantaha. So now I'm going to show you the 3rd technique. Now this technique is slightly more complex, but I'm confident you'll be able to follow along and figure it out. So for this 3rd technique, we need to find something known as the upapada. So in that last technique, we were looking for the pada. Now we're trying to find the upapada. And again, you don't need to worry about what the upapada is. You simply need to be able to find it in your chart. So let's look at Oprah's chart again to find the upapada. And what we need to do is we need to locate her 10th house cusp. So her 10th house cusp, to locate that, all we need to do is go to her main birth chart and we need to look for the number 10. So we see that the number 10 is here. Now, her 10th house cusp is actually not in her 10th house because this square or this box right here would be, that's her 10th house. But we see that the number 10 is over here. So that means that her 10th house cusp is actually in her 11th house. That's okay. The 10th house cusp doesn't always need to be in the 10th house. To figure out if she is a Sri Mantaha, we needed to find the 10th house cusp. Now that we found the 10th house cusp, what we need to do is we need to figure out what sign is the 10th house cusp in. So the 10th house cusp is in the sign of Libra. Okay, so we need to figure out what planet is the ruler of Libra. So the ruler of Libra is Venus. Okay, so I have Oprah's chart here. We're looking for the upapada and her 10th house cusp is right here. Okay, her 10th house cusp is ruled by the planet Venus. So we need to see how many houses away Venus is from the 10th house cusp. So let's start counting from the 10th house cusp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so from the 10th house cusp, Venus is 5 houses away. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When the ruler, and I know this says find the pada, but we can use the same table to find the upapada. So when the ruler is in the 5th or the 11th, then the pada, or in this case the upapada, goes to the 9th house. So the upapada is actually going to go over here. From the 10th house cusp, we're going to count 9 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so her Upapada is falling over here in the sign of Gemini. So let's go back to her chart. Okay, now what we said is we want to see the Upapada with either Jupiter, Venus, the moon, or an exalted planet. Her Upapada is right here in the sign of Gemini. And look at that. Jupiter is there. And again, it has an R, which means retrograde. Doesn't matter. Jupiter being in that house with her Upapada, it makes her a Sri Mantaha. So Oprah has it again. As I mentioned, she has Sri Mantaha multiple times. So this is another one. She's a Sri Mantaha once again. Let's look at another chart. So we're gonna go back to Drake's chart. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna find that 10th house cusp. We're gonna find where the ruler is, and then we're gonna use that information to help us figure out where the Upapada is. So the 10th house cusp is right here. And in Drake's chart, the 10th house cusp is actually in the 10th house. Sometimes it's in the 10th house, sometimes it's not. In this case, it actually is in the 10th house. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out who's the ruler of this sign that the 10th house cusp is in. The 10th house cusp is in the sign of Taurus. All right. So Taurus is ruled by Venus. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to find how far away is Venus from the 10th house cusp. So where's Venus? Venus is over here. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? In Drake's chart, Venus is 7 houses away from his 10th house cusp. I have Drake's chart here. And again, his 10th house cusp is over here. Venus is over here. Venus is 7 places away from the 10th house cusp. So when the ruler is in the 1st or in the 7th, then the pada goes to the 10th house. So we're going to count 10 places from the 10th house cusp. And we're counting 10 places because the Upapada is going to the 10th house. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. So his Upapada is falling in the sign of Aquarius. And as mentioned, we want to see either Jupiter, Venus, the moon, or an exalted planet sitting with the Upapada. So let's go back to his chart. All right. So we're in the sign of Aquarius where his Upapada is located. The only planet that's there is Mars. Okay. So Mars, obviously it's not Jupiter, Venus, or the moon, but is Mars exalted? Let's confirm if Mars is exalted. So Mars becomes exalted in the sign of Capricorn. And in Drake's chart, Mars is in the sign of Aquarius. So it's pretty close, but it's not in the sign of Capricorn, which means it's not exalted, which means that Drake is not a Sri Mantaha based on his Upapada. But that's okay. He's a Sri Mantaha in a couple different ways, but not this one. So that's the third technique. This is probably the most complicated one, but it's not too bad, I hope. So that's how you confirm if you're a Sri Mantaha